My name is Mary-Beth Sharp, and for the Integration of Reading Components project, I chose the two books, The Tiny Turtles by Wendy McLean and The Tortoise and the Hare by Janet Stevens. Tiny Turtles is a book about five friends who wanted to have a race, and four of them would run into problems before they ever could cross the finish line, starting with Rodney Red, who was very old and slow, and he just decided to stay at the starting line and watch his friends run. Graham Greene was running fast, but a bird decided to land on him, and that stopped him in the race. Betsy Blue got too hot, and she decided to stop off for a drink, which took her out of the race. Penny Pink was in the lead for a while, but she got tired and decided to stop and take a nap. And Patsy Purple was left to win the race. It's a cute little story and about the little turtles who really enjoy to swim more than they love to run. I went through the book and chose some key vocabulary words I thought that were important to the book. I have posted these up for our ELL students who are just beginning to speak English, and so our vocabulary words are in English and in Spanish. And here are our vocabulary words and definitions in English. And I'll have these up on the whiteboard so that our students can write them down. And I also made a list of our vocabulary words and their definitions in Spanish as well for our ELL students. For our ELL students, they will get a hard copy of both the vocabulary words and definitions in English and in Spanish. The next book I chose is a classic, The Tortoise and the Hare, and this story is, I think, pertinent for today even because it's about bullying, and I think there are some great lessons to be learned in this little story. It's about a tortoise and a hare, where the hare makes fun of the tortoise all the time about how slow he is, and it makes him feel really bad about himself. And while the hare is tormenting the tortoise, he challenges him to a race, and his friends really want him to do it, but the tortoise gets so scared that he hides down in his shell, and he doesn't want to have any part of it because he's so afraid. But his friends talk him into it, and they help him to get ready for the race, and they go running with him and feed him all of the right foods. And the hare does nothing to get ready for the race because he thinks he's so magnificent, and he runs around all the time, and he's always on the go, so he has nothing to worry about. So the race begins, and of course the rabbit just takes off going as fast as he can, and the tortoise also takes off going as fast as he can, which is very slow and steady. The rabbit gets so far ahead of him that he decides to stop off for some juice at a friend's house, and while he's there visiting, the tortoise walks past the house, and so the hare takes off, and he's running again and catches up with him and passes him again, and decides to stop off at another friend's house for a snack. And the tortoise is just going along in his steady little pace and passes the hare again. And so outruns the hare just as fast as he can, and he passes the tortoise once again. And the tortoise never once stops. He just keeps on going, And the rabbit gets so far ahead of him that he actually decides to lay under the tree and take a nap. And he's dreaming about his victory and how exciting it's going to be when he crosses that finish line. And all of a sudden, he is startled awake by the sounds of cheering and excitement. And what he's hearing is the tortoise crossing over the finish line. And he has beaten the hare. And the moral of this story is hard work and perseverance bring reward. So I picked out some key vocabulary words that I thought were important to this book as well. And I have those listed in English and also in Spanish, just as I had done with our first book. And these are our vocabulary words and definitions in English. And our vocabulary words and definitions in Spanish. And just like I have done with our other vocabulary words, I have them on the whiteboard for our students to copy down. And then again, with our ELL students, they'll receive a hard copy of words and definitions in English and in Spanish. For our ELL accommodations, I have books that we're reading in both English and in Spanish. And our vocabulary words and definitions have been provided in both English and in Spanish as well. I will be reading the book aloud, and our ELL students can follow along in their Spanish copies, even while I'm reading in English, and it will help them to hear the word in English orally while they follow along in their Spanish copies. Of course, they're able to have a copy of the English version as well, and they can choose to use that book instead of the Spanish if they want to. Social and academic language, also known as pragmatic language, is a language we use when we're talking to our friends, and it's just a social, if we're out to lunch and we're enjoying each other, if we're at recess and we're playing. These are, this is the kind of language that pragmatic language is. Academic language is when you're speaking in a classroom, whether you're asking questions to your teacher or we're reading in our textbooks, learning new vocabulary words, taking tests or doing assignments. It is our oral, written, auditory, and visual language. Semantic variability is the meaning system. There are different meanings for the same word, which makes it very difficult for our ELL students when learning to speak English. Vocabulary is a key component of the system, and our culture and environment can affect the meanings of these words as well, depending on where we're coming from. For this activity, I'm going to have our students choose a vocabulary word, any word that they want from either book, and whatever word they choose, they're going to write down whatever word comes to mind that reminds them of that vocabulary word. Syntax variability is our sentence structure. It's how words are organized in the English language. ELLs will for sure have difficulty with this, especially those Spanish speaking, because our sentence structures are completely different with the English language as it is in the Spanish language. So for this activity, I'm just going to write some sentences on the whiteboard for our students to choose the correct one. And like I said, it may be more challenging for our ELLs, but it'll be very good practice for them as well. Components of reading are phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, comprehension, fluency, and oral language. Phonological awareness is an umbrella term for how language can be divided into its different components. Students learn to read and learn sentence structure by listening to others, the way they talk, the way they read, through hearing and manipulating parts of the spoken language, and they recognize the different sounds and words and learn to sound out words for themselves. Phonics teaches students the relationship between the written word and sounds. Sounds are known as phonemes, and there are 44 of them. Letters are graphemes, and there are 26 letters in the English alphabet. So for this activity, we will play the clapping game, and the students will clap out each syllable to every one of our vocabulary words. So for our vocabulary words, I'll have a slide of the words and their definitions in English and in Spanish for our ELL students. And as I said before, there'll be a hard copy for each one of those. Reading the vocabulary words and their definitions first before we read the book will make it easier for them to understand the words and the books that we read together. Comprehension is the ultimate goal in reading. Reading comprehension can occur before, during, and after a student has finished reading. To better understand what a student is reading, they can ask questions, reread what they've already read, and summarize. So for this activity, students will be writing a summary of the books that we read. Fluency. The components of fluency are accuracy, automaticity, rate, and prosody. For our fluency activity, and to help our students become better fluent readers, I will read segments of the book aloud first, and they'll read the same segment back to me exactly the way they heard it, pausing when I paused, being more excited in my voice, and so they'll pick up on those. And this is known as echo reading. Oral language is an agreed upon communication system. This is how we talk to each other. It is critical for academic success and has strong relations to reading comprehension and written language. The components of oral language are phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics. Intensive environment and reading development. I will start our students off with the lower level reading book first, Tiny Turtles, which is very low. And then we'll advance to a higher level book, which is still also very low. I believe it's a level 1 book, The Tortoise and the Hare. It's still low enough that they can understand what they're reading, but the book also broadens their vocabulary and gives real life advice, real world connections as far as I said before, where the poor tortoise is being bullied. Hot questions about how we should treat one another. How did the tortoise feel when Hare teased him all the time about being slow? And another hot question could be, how could you help a friend that was being teased by someone? Student monitoring and self-correcting. Assisted reading is how I will monitor my students. I'll encourage them to sound out each word and to ask questions to me and to themselves. I'll give them feedback on the rate of their reading, their expressions, pronunciation, and phrasing. For our reading assessment, I will give our students a reader's theater assignment. The students will write their very own scripts for this assignment, and they will be assessed on both their written skills and their oral fluency.